I used to work the graveyard shift at a gas station just off Highway 63, one of those stretches of road where the world feels half forgotten. The place sat a few miles outside a small Midwestern town that barely showed up on maps. If you were driving through at night, you wouldn't even notice it unless your gas light was flashing red. There was a single pump island, 2 buzzing fluorescent lights that stuttered more than they glowed, and a cramped convenience store that always smelled like burnt coffee, oil, and old rubber. I was 19 at the time, broke, restless, and too young to realize how much of a mistake working alone at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere might be. My boss had promised it was easy money. He said nights were quiet, slow, and uneventful, mostly truckers heading south, or the occasional lost driver asking where the hell they'd taken a wrong turn. For the first few weeks, that was true. It was peaceful in its own eerie way, quiet enough that you could hear the buzz of the light fixtures and the soft hum of the coolers in the back. I got used to the rhythm, refill the coffee pot, wipe down the counter, stare at the empty highway until the next set of headlights drifted by. There's something hypnotic about being the only one awake for miles, like you've slipped out of sync with time itself. But after a while, the silence starts to play tricks on you. You begin noticing every flicker in the lights, every creak in the floor, every gust of wind that presses against the glass like it's breathing. That night started like any other. It was early October, that sweet spot between summer and frost, when the air has a sharp chill but still smells like dry leaves. A thick fog had rolled in around 10, so heavy it swallowed the parking lot whole. From the counter, I couldn't see more than a few yards past the pumps. Everything beyond that was just white haze and the faint orange glow of the highway sign. Around midnight, I was halfway through my thermos of coffee, trying to keep myself awake, when I noticed a car at the far end of the lot. It hadn't been there before. Its headlights were off, and it wasn't parked near the pumps, just sitting halfway in the fog, engine idling low, exhaust barely visible in the cold. I hadn't heard it pull in. Usually you can hear the crunch of gravel or the rattle of the bell that hung over the door when someone came inside. But there had been nothing. Just silence. At first, I figured someone had pulled over to rest. Truckers did that sometimes, or drunk college kids trying to sleep it off before getting back on the road. But this wasn't a truck. It was an old black sedan, long body, tinted windows, the kind of car that feels out of place in any decade. I could see the faint orange of a cigarette burning inside, just for a second, before it vanished. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The car didn't move. No one got out. No lights, no door opening, nothing. Just that low hum of the idling engine. I stared at it through the window, trying to convince myself it was fine. But the longer I looked, the more uneasy I felt, like something behind those dark windows was staring back. Finally, curiosity won. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the door chime jingling softly behind me. The fog was thick enough to blur the edges of the gas station lights, and the cold air hit me like a slap. Every sound felt amplified, the buzz of the lights, the hum of the cooler fans inside, the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I started walking slowly toward the pumps, angling my flashlight toward the far end of the lot. That's when the sedan's headlights flicked on, bright, blinding white, and then, just as quickly, turned off again. I froze. My first thought was that whoever was inside had seen me coming. My second thought was that I needed to go back inside, now. I began backing up, slow and careful, my heart thudding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I reached the door handle, I heard it, the sharp click of a car door opening. Just one. Then, a moment later, it closed softly. Footsteps followed. Not fast. Not running. Just steady, deliberate crunches on the gravel, coming closer. I swung my flashlight toward the sound, cutting through the fog, but all I saw was white mist swirling in the beam. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound calm. A long pause. Then, from somewhere in the fog, a low voice answered, rough, raspy, like sandpaper scraping metal. "You're open, right?" Every instinct in my body screamed not to answer. But training kicked in before fear could. "Yeah," I managed. "We're open." The voice didn't respond right away. Then I heard the footsteps again, closer now, scuffing against the pavement. My hand tightened on the flashlight. Finally, a figure appeared, tall, thin, stepping out from the fog like it had been holding him. He wore a dark jacket and gloves, his face pale and expressionless beneath the harsh glow of the lights. He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Didn't think anyone was working this late." I forced a laugh. "Just me." I held the door open, trying to act casual as he walked in. His footsteps on the tile were heavy, wet from the fog. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, not just looking, but studying. He wandered the aisles aimlessly, never picking anything up, his gloved hands buried in his pockets. I kept my eyes on him through the convex mirror above the counter. Every few seconds, he'd glance up at me, sharp, deliberate, measuring. When he finally came up to the register, he didn't buy anything. His voice was low when he said, "You got a restroom key?" I nodded and handed him the yellow plastic tag that hung on a chain. He took it slowly, his eyes still locked on mine, then walked out the back door where the restrooms were. Minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10. The outside light flicked on. Then off. The door creaked. But he didn't come back. I went to the window to look. The key was lying on the ground, swinging slightly on its chain. The man was gone. His car was still there, engine running, headlights off. I picked up the phone to call my boss, but before I could even dial, I heard the soft chime of the doorbell behind me. I turned slowly, heart hammering in my throat, but there was no one there. The door stood wide open, fog curling in like smoke, drifting across the tile. The wind pushed the door just enough to make the bell jingle faintly each time it swayed. That sound, soft, steady, almost rhythmic, made my skin crawl. I took a shaky breath, stepped forward, and pushed the door shut. This time, I locked it. The air inside felt colder than before, heavier somehow, like the fog had brought the night in with it. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring out the glass at the empty lot. The black sedan was gone. The pumps were still. The fog had swallowed everything beyond the first few feet of concrete. I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. I turned back toward the store. The place was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerators. My flashlight beam cut through the aisles, sweeping over rows of chips, soda bottles, and candy bars glinting under the harsh white light. Everything looked the same, yet something felt wrong, like the store itself was holding its breath. I moved behind the counter, hands shaking, and picked up the phone again. I'd barely started dialing when I heard it, a sharp clatter from aisle 3. Something had fallen. A can rolled slowly across the tile, spinning lazily before coming to a stop just inches from my foot. I froze, staring down at it. The label was turned away, but I could see the condensation, the faint smear of a fingerprint on the metal. My brain tried to rationalize, maybe it slipped off the shelf, maybe it was nothing, but before I could convince myself, I caught something in the corner of my eye. The reflection. In the glass door of the cooler beside me, a faint shape stood motionless at the end of the aisle. It was him. The man. He wasn't looking at me, not directly. He was staring at his reflection, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he didn't recognize the face staring back. His expression was blank, almost curious, like he was studying a stranger. I ducked down behind the counter and pressed the receiver to my ear, whispering hoarsely, "There's someone in the store." He came back. My voice shook so badly that the dispatcher on the other end had to ask me to repeat myself. I said, "He's inside." He came back. "Stay on the line," she said calmly. "We're sending officers now. Stay hidden." I risked a glance over the counter. The man was moving again. Slowly. Deliberately. His gloved hand dragged along the shelf, knocking items off one by one, each clatter louder than the last. He wasn't in a hurry. He was savoring it. Then, he stopped. At the end of the aisle. And turned his head toward me. That smile again, wide, unnatural, stretching too far across his face. His eyes caught the light and seemed to shimmer, like glass catching fire. He started walking. Each step echoed through the store. Slow, steady, boots squeaking faintly against the tile. I crouched lower, heart pounding so hard it felt like the sound might give me away. He wasn't looking for money. He wasn't here to rob me. This was something else, something personal. The footsteps stopped. Right in front of the counter. The silence that followed felt alive, pressing down, waiting. I could hear his breathing, calm and measured, just inches away. Then, in a soft, almost cheerful tone, he said. You should have stayed outside. For a split second, everything in me froze. Then instinct took over. I grabbed the flashlight, stood up, and swung it toward the sound, the beam slicing through the air. He was gone. Vanished. The aisle was empty. I blinked hard, sweeping the light across the room, my pulse roaring in my ears. Nothing. The shelves stood undisturbed, the floor spotless, the door still locked. My mind couldn't make sense of it. I stumbled backward until I hit the far wall, the flashlight trembling in my grip. Sir. Sir, are you safe? The dispatcher's voice crackled through the receiver still dangling from the counter. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat was tight, my tongue felt heavy. I could only breathe, shallow, ragged gasps that sounded too loud in the silence. Then, outside, a sudden burst of red and blue light cut through the fog. The police. I ran to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands, waving frantically as the cruisers pulled up. The fog glowed in their headlights like smoke, and for the first time that night, I felt something close to relief. But relief didn't last long. The officers searched the building, the lot, even the wooded patch behind the bathrooms. They found nothing. No footprints in the gravel. No tire tracks where the sedan had been. It was as if the car, and the man, had never existed. One of the officers pulled me aside to review the security footage. My stomach sank as we watched the tape. The sedan was there when I first saw it, idling in the fog. Then, at 12:47 a.m., it pulled away, headlights flaring, taillights fading down the highway. The timestamp showed that happened nearly 15 minutes before the man had come back into the store. The restroom camera feed? 4 solid minutes of static. No image, no sound, just dead air. They told me it was probably a glitch. Maybe a transient who wanted to scare me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I quit 2 days later. Now, years later, I still can't pass a gas station at night without thinking about that fog, that face. Sometimes, when I stop to fill up on long drives, I catch myself glancing toward the glass doors, half expecting to see a tall figure standing there, smiling too wide, watching me. And every now and then, when the lights flicker just right, I swear I see him, not outside, but in the reflection. I used to work nights as a janitor at a regional hospital in my hometown. The pay wasn't great, but I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, the low hum of machines, the rhythmic beeping from distant monitors, and the soft echo of my footsteps down long, sterile corridors. There was something oddly peaceful about being awake while everyone else slept, like I was moving through a world paused between breaths. My shift was simple enough: mop the ER hallway, empty the trash bins, disinfect patient rooms, and repeat until dawn. The hospital at night had its own kind of heartbeat, predictable, steady, comfortingly dull. But there was one part of the building I never liked cleaning. The East Wing. Everyone called it Ward C. It used to be part of the old maternity ward before the hospital's renovation about a decade ago. Now it was just storage, stacks of broken gurneys, rusting 4-poles, faded curtains, and cardboard boxes filled with old medical records. The lights flickered constantly, the air smelled like dust and bleach, and there were no cameras down there. The only bit of technology left was a single motion sensor light at the far end of the hall, one that liked to turn on by itself, even when no one was around. Most nights, I saved that section for last. My supervisor preferred it that way, less chance of interrupting patients or staff. Usually, I'd throw in my earbuds and drown out the emptiness with music, just to make the silence bearable. But that night, my phone had died halfway through my shift. So it was just me, the mop, and the soft squeak of the bucket wheels echoing off the tiles. The clock on my cart read 3:07 a.m. The air in the east wing felt colder than the rest of the hospital, stale, heavy, almost damp. My breath fogged faintly under the flickering lights. I told myself it was just poor insulation. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hallway didn't want me there. I was halfway down the corridor when I passed room 214, the one with the busted doorframe and peeling paint, and froze. Laughter. Faint, high-pitched, and brief. It was the kind of laugh a toddler makes when they're chasing bubbles or being tickled, light, joyful, completely out of place. My mop stopped mid-stroke. Every sound in the hallway seemed to vanish except the faint dripping of a leaking pipe. My first thought was that I'd imagined it. Maybe it was the plumbing, or a creak in the vents. But I knew what I'd heard. A child's laughter. And there were no children on this floor. The hospital's pediatric wing was 2 stories down, and visiting hours had ended hours ago. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the steady hum of the old fluorescent lights overhead. Probably just overtired, I muttered to myself, forcing a shaky laugh. I went back to mopping, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. That's when the motion light at the far end of the hallway flicked on. A pale cone of light cut through the darkness for about 20 seconds, then blinked off again. I froze, mop handle slick in my palms. No one should have been there. Not at that hour. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. I told myself it was probably a mouse, or a stray draft, something harmless that tripped the sensor. But I couldn't stop staring down that corridor, waiting for it to flicker again. Finally, I forced myself to move. One stroke. Then another. The rhythmic swish of the mop was almost soothing, until I heard something else, a voice. Soft. Gentle. Almost a whisper. He's still sleeping. A woman's voice. I froze, the words echoing faintly down the hall from the same direction as the laughter. It wasn't a moan or a groan from a patient, it was speech. Calm. Caring. Like a mother. I stepped slowly toward the doorway it had come from, room 214. The same broken doorframe. The same chill in the air. My flashlight beam slid over the stripped bed inside, a thin sheet of plastic crinkling in the breeze from a broken vent. A dead monitor blinked faintly in the corner, its green light pulsing on and off like a heartbeat. But no one was there. The room was empty. I swallowed hard. Hello. I whispered, my voice breaking halfway through the word. The sound didn't travel far, it just seemed to die in the air. Then, right behind me, close, impossibly close, came a soft giggle. A child's giggle. I spun around, flashlight trembling, scanning the hallway. Nothing. Empty. But the mop I'd left leaning against the wall was swaying slightly, as if someone had brushed past it. That was enough for me. I didn't wait to convince myself it was nothing. I grabbed the mop, shoved it into the bucket, and pushed it as fast as I could down the corridor. My footsteps echoed too loudly. Every flicker of the light made me flinch. When I finally reached the main wing, I nearly collided with one of the night nurses at her station, Lila. She looked up, startled. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you saw a ghost." I tried to laugh, but it came out shaky. "You ever hear anyone in the East Wing?" Her smile faltered. For a second, something unreadable crossed her face. Then she said quietly, "They shut that section down after the fire. Don't go back there alone." I didn't ask her what fire she meant. I didn't want to know. The rest of the night, I stayed near the break room, pretending to clean while keeping my eyes on the hallway. Every time a light flickered or the PA crackled, my chest tightened. By the time my shift ended, dawn was bleeding through the windows. As I clocked out, I glanced back down toward Ward C. The motion light at the far end was glowing steadily again. But there was no one there to trigger it. The next night, I tried to avoid the East Wing altogether. After what had happened, just thinking about that hallway made my stomach twist. But my supervisor, completely unaware of how rattled I'd been, specifically told me to finish disinfecting the supply closets down there. I told myself I'd be quick. Get in, get out, and don't listen for anything. By 2:45 a.m., I was pushing my cart down the same corridor, the wheels squeaking in the silence. Every sound seemed amplified, the faint hum of the lights, the distant hiss of air vents, even my own breathing. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Not the kind of chill from bad insulation, this was sharp, heavy, like walking into a freezer. Beneath the usual bleach and cleaner, there was a faint scent of smoke. Halfway down the hall, I stopped. The door to room 214 was standing wide open. I knew I'd closed it the night before. My throat went dry. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped closer, the beam shaking as I raised it. Inside, the light from the hallway barely reached the bed. The plastic sheet still hung loosely over the frame, swaying slightly, as if someone had brushed past it moments ago. Then I saw them, faint handprints pressed into the dust on the mattress. Small ones. Tiny, like a child's. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I told myself it had to be my imagination, or maybe someone else had been in here earlier. But before I could convince myself, the old heart monitor in the corner blinked to life. Beep. A single green pulse ran across the screen. Then another. The monitor wasn't plugged into anything. The beeping grew louder, steady, rhythmic. Beep, beep, beep. It echoed in the still air like a heartbeat. That's when the intercom crackled overhead. Static filled the hallway, followed by a faint whisper, soft and trembling, a woman's voice I recognized from the night before. "He's awake." The flashlight slipped from my hand. It hit the tile and rolled, its beam spinning wildly across the walls and floor. The shadows twisted with it, until one of them didn't move. A figure stood in the far corner of the room. A woman in a pale hospital gown, her back to me, her hair hanging in tangled clumps. She stood perfectly still, head bowed slightly, as if watching something I couldn't see. My body locked up. The air smelled stronger now, acrid and smoky, like burned plastic and wet ash. Somewhere close, I heard soft coughing. Small. Ragged. A child's. "Hello." I whispered before I could stop myself. My voice barely sounded human. The woman turned her head, just enough for the light to catch the edge of her face. Her skin was gray, mottled with soot. One eye was visible, wide and clouded. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no sound came. Then, suddenly, silence. The monitor stopped beeping. The intercom cut off mid-static. And when I blinked, she was gone. The corner was empty. That was it for me. I bolted. My shoes skidded on the tile as I tore down the hallway, pushing through the stairwell door so hard it slammed against the wall. I sank onto the steps, shaking, heart hammering so loud I could barely hear anything else. I don't know how long I sat there before a security guard found me. His name was Darren, older guy, worked the night shift for years. He looked at my face and didn't even ask at first, he just sat beside me. When I finally told him what I'd seen, his expression went pale. "You said it was room 214, he asked quietly. I nodded. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "That's where the fire started." He told me that 11 years ago, before the renovation, there'd been a short circuit in Ward C's electrical room. The sprinklers failed in the east wing. A mother and her newborn were trapped inside. Staff tried to reach them, but by the time they forced open the door to 214, it was too late. The woman's name was Emily Harris. Her baby had been born premature, just 2 days old. No one ever figured out exactly how the fire spread that fast. Then Darren said something that made my blood run cold. "You're not the first to hear her. People working nights say she still checks on him. Sometimes, they hear her voice over the PA system, even though that line's been disconnected since the renovation." I didn't go back to Ward C after that. 2 weeks later, I quit. The hospital said I was overworked, that night shifts can mess with your head. Maybe they're right. Maybe exhaustion can make you see things that aren't there, hear things that can't exist. But I know what I heard. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still hear that faint, rhythmic beeping, soft at first, then faster, until it stops. I used to work the night shift at a shipping warehouse just outside of Cleveland. The place was huge, a maze of concrete floors, metal shelving, and the constant mechanical hum that seemed to live in the walls. Even when nothing moved, the sound never really stopped. It was like the building itself was breathing. Most nights, there were only 3 of us, me, a forklift operator named Greg, and a security guard named Wallace who did rounds every hour. The pay wasn't bad, and the quiet suited me. You could go an entire shift without seeing another person, just the echo of your own footsteps and the steady rhythm of the conveyors. But after a while, that kind of silence starts to get inside your head. Every creak sounds like a whisper. Every shadow feels like it's waiting for you to turn your back. It was early winter, the kind of cold that seeped through your gloves and made the air sting when you breathed. That night, the lights in the loading bay had started flickering again. They always did after midnight. The electrician said it was a grounding issue, but the pattern felt deliberate. Like something was testing the switches. Greg had clocked out early, said he wasn't feeling well. That left me alone in the back, organizing pallets and scanning barcodes while the overhead lights buzzed faintly above. Wallace was in the front booth watching the monitors. The warehouse stretched so far that even shouting felt useless. Your voice would just echo and die somewhere in the rafters. Around 2 in the morning, I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. One of the motion-activated lights down in Section 7 had clicked on. At first, I didn't think much of it. The sensors were sensitive, sometimes a bird or a rat in the rafters could set them off. But usually, the light would go off again after a minute. This one didn't. I kept working, waiting for it to fade. It stayed on. Then the next light down the row flicked on. Then the next. One by one, the lights illuminated a path straight down the aisle, like a trail leading somewhere. I called out, "Wallace. That you?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, cutting through the quiet. It echoed back, too long, too hollow. No answer. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, the metallic kind of scent that hangs around industrial spaces. But underneath it, I thought I caught something else, something faintly burnt, like heated wiring. The hairs on my arms lifted. I started walking, pushing my cart slowly down the aisle. The light above me flickered, buzzed, then steadied. When I reached the end, I saw someone standing under the last light in the row. At first, I thought it was Greg. Same height, same build. But Greg had gone home hours ago. The man stood facing the shelves, head tilted slightly down, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. I could see the faint outline of a jacket, heavy boots, and something metallic on his wrist catching the light every so often, maybe a watch or a bracelet. "Hey," I called. "You're not supposed to be back here." No response. He didn't move. Didn't even breathe, as far as I could tell. I took another step forward, my shoes squeaking against the polished floor. The light above him buzzed louder, a low, electric hum, then dimmed and steadied again. I blinked once. And he was gone. Just gone. No footsteps. No sound. No door opening or closing. 1 second he was there, the next, the space was empty. I stood there frozen, the silence pressing in from all sides. Then, somewhere behind me, a drop of condensation fell from the rafters and hit the floor with a sharp plink. It was such a small sound, but it made me jump. I grabbed my radio. "Wallace," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You watching the monitors?" "Yeah," he answered immediately. "Why? You see anyone near Section 7? A short pause. Then, "No. Section 7's been dark for the last half hour." "Why?" I swallowed. "Check again." "Hang on," I could hear him clicking through the feeds. Then his tone changed, suddenly tight, alert. "Wait. Stay where you are." Something in his voice made my skin crawl. "What is it?" Another pause. Then he said quietly, "Who's that standing behind you?" My blood ran cold. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the scanner. The aisle behind me was empty, just rows of shelves disappearing into shadow. "There's nobody here," I said. Wallace's voice crackled through again, shaky this time. "I swear I just saw a person behind you on the camera. Right there, by the shelf to your left. They were just standing there." That was all I needed to hear. I started backing away, keeping my eyes on the end of the aisle. Every light seemed too dim, every corner too deep. I didn't stop moving until I reached the main hallway where Wallace was waiting, flashlight in hand. His face was pale, eyes wide. "Let's check the feed," he said. We fast-forwarded through hours of static footage, just me moving between aisles, forklifts idling, shadows shifting. Then we hit the moment. And there he was. A man in dark clothes, standing at the far end of Section 7, motionless. Then, slowly, he turned toward the camera. His face was nothing but shadow, except for his eyes. Both reflected white. Wallace froze the frame, staring at the screen in silence. The timestamp read 2:07 a.m. But I hadn't seen him since 2:13. We called the night supervisor right after we saw it. He arrived 20 minutes later, half asleep, irritated that we'd interrupted his coffee break, but the second he looked at the monitor, his expression changed. The image was gone. The file had corrupted, replaced with static and a shrill, looping hiss that made my ears ring. The IT guy came in later that morning and shrugged it off, said the cameras were old analog junk and sometimes glitched during electrical surges. But that didn't make sense, only that one camera was affected, and the corruption started exactly when the figure turned to face it. Wallace didn't believe it either. He printed the last frame before it glitched, a grainy still image that looked far worse in daylight. The outline of the figure was too sharp compared to the rest of the picture, like it had been cut and pasted in. And those eyes, too small, perfect circles of white, seemed to follow wherever you stood. He taped the photo to the wall of the security booth for reference, but I swear every time I walked past, it looked like the head had turned slightly toward the door. For the next few nights, I avoided Section 7 altogether. I'd finish my loading runs early, stack boxes near the front, and linger by the vending machines where the radio played low, tinny rock music. Noise helped. It made things feel human again. But the weird stuff didn't stop, it just got quieter, subtler. Tools went missing from my cart. Boxes I stacked neatly one night would be crooked or shifted by morning. Sometimes the conveyor belts would start moving for no reason, slow and stuttering, then stop as soon as I got close. Wallace started doing full patrols every hour instead of watching the screens. He said it made him feel less useless. I think he was just scared to sit still. A few nights later, maybe 3, maybe 4, I was halfway through my shift when it happened again. All the lights in Section 7 flicked on at once. It wasn't gradual this time, no motion trigger, no delay. Just bam, every bulb humming to life like something had woken up. I froze where I stood, the scanner still in my hand. Then Wallace's voice crackled through the radio. "Don't move." There was something in his tone that made my throat tighten. No confusion, no hesitation. Just cold, clipped fear. I didn't ask why. I just stood there, listening. The line went silent except for faint static, that thin, ghostly hiss when someone's holding down the button but not talking. I could hear his breathing faintly beneath it. Then he whispered, barely audible, "He's back." My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. "Where?" I whispered. No answer. The static grew louder, then cut off with a soft click. "Wallace?" "Nothing." I took off running, the wheels of my cart squealing as I pushed past pallets toward the security booth. My boots echoed through the aisles, each step sounding too loud in the dead air. When I rounded the corner to the office, the door was wide open, swinging slightly. Wallace's chair was empty. The monitors were still rolling, all except one. Section 7. On that screen, the same dark figure stood in the middle of the aisle again. But this time, there were two. One taller, one shorter, side by side, motionless, facing the camera. My hand hovered over the radio, but I couldn't press the button. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Then one by one, the other cameras started to cut out, not to black, but to static. Each monitor popped, fizzed, and went dead until only the Section 7 feed remained. Then that one flickered too. The hum of the warehouse stopped, every machine, every fan, every bit of power. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my heartbeat echoing in my ears. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then the lights snapped back on, bright enough to sting. The monitors rebooted. Every aisle was empty. And Wallace, he was standing at the far end of the main hall, flashlight trembling in his hand. His face looked hollow, gray under the fluorescence, like he'd aged 20 years in half an hour. He didn't say a word, just pointed toward the exit. We didn't clock out. We didn't pack up. We just left. Neither of us ever went back. A few weeks later, long after I'd found another job, I got a text from Wallace. No message, just a picture. It was a still frame from a different warehouse, grainy, black and white, taken from a security feed. Two figures stood side by side under a flickering light. One tall, one small. They were facing the camera. And even through the blur, I could see it, both pairs of eyes glowing white. He never texted again. And I deleted the photo. But sometimes, when my phone screen goes black, I swear I still see their reflections. About 6 years ago, I worked the overnight shift as a security guard at a mall that was practically dead, one of those hollowed-out relics from the late 70s that refused to die completely. You've probably seen places like it, half the storefronts boarded up, the food court dark and dusty, maybe 3 shops still clinging on out of habit more than profit. Our company handled properties that were waiting to be sold or torn down, so most nights were simple: walk the halls, log the rounds, keep transients from breaking in. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and except for one janitor who left around midnight, I was completely alone. The place itself had a strange kind of silence, thick, heavy, alive. When you're the only person inside a massive building meant to hold thousands, you start to notice things: the buzz of dying lights, the distant groan of old ventilation systems, even your own footsteps bouncing back at you from the empty corridors. Sometimes I'd stop just to listen and feel how the quiet seemed to breathe. For the first couple of weeks, it was boring but peaceful. I'd sip from my thermos, check my route every hour, and sit in the control booth flipping through the camera feeds. Most of them barely worked, static, frozen frames, or black screens. The only real light came from the skylights, faint yellow streaks from the street lamps outside. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. Then, during my third week, the weirdness started. At first, it was little things. A door that I knew I'd locked would be open the next round. Distant voices whispering through the vents when the air system wasn't even running. Once, I thought I heard the faint echo of footsteps trailing behind me, perfectly in sync with mine, stopping whenever I stopped. I blamed it on acoustics, on how sound carried through empty space. That's what you do on night shifts, you rationalize. Otherwise, you go crazy. But one night, my third Saturday on the job, something happened that I still can't explain. It was just past 2 in the morning, and I was doing my usual patrol through the East Wing, the oldest part of the mall, where most of the stores had long since shut down. The signboards were faded, the windows layered with dust thick enough to write your name in. That section also held the old Cinemax Theater, shut down since 2009 after the chain went bankrupt. The doors were covered in plywood, but there were still gaps between the planks, just wide enough to see into the main lobby if you leaned close. As I passed the entrance, I heard something faint coming from inside. Music. Not the kind you'd expect from someone's phone or a radio. It sounded vintage. Like one of those old, "let's all go to the lobby" jingles they used to play before the previews at drive-ins. The tune was muffled but distinct, playful, cheerful, completely out of place in that dead hallway. I stopped, pressed my ear closer to one of the cracks. The air on the other side felt cooler, like standing near an open freezer door. Then, light flickered inside. It started soft, a faint pulse, like a projector coming to life. My stomach dropped. That entire section hadn't had power in years. I took a step back, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The red exit sign above the doorway blinked once, twice, then went dark. For a split second, the only light came from the projector beam slicing through the cracks in the boards. Dust floated in it like ash. And through that narrow slit, I swear I saw shadows moving across the seats, faint silhouettes, people sitting shoulder to shoulder, like an audience watching something that wasn't there anymore. I fumbled for my radio and pressed the button. "Control, this is Guard 12. Anyone testing the power in the East Theater?" Static. I tried again, louder this time. "Control, you reading me?" The reply wasn't a voice, it was breathing. Low, steady, close. Then a crackle, and silence. I turned the radio off. The air around me felt electric, heavy. I could smell dust and something faintly metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, but training forced me to finish the round. I moved quickly, flashlight sweeping over shuttered storefronts and cracked tile. Every few seconds I'd glance back down the corridor, half expecting to see the theater door wide open. When I finally made it back to the security booth, my hands were shaking. I set down my coffee, took a deep breath, and looked at the monitors, most of them static-filled as usual. Except one. The feed from the theater camera. That camera hadn't worked since my first night. I knew because I'd written "offline" next to it in the daily log. But now, the screen glowed faint gray, an interior shot of the theater from the projection booth. And it wasn't empty. There were people sitting in the seats. Dozens of them. Perfectly still. All facing the screen. No movement, no sound. Just a silent audience, watching something I couldn't see. I stared at that monitor for what felt like a full minute before I realized something was off. The timestamp on the footage wasn't current. It didn't say 2020 something like the other feeds, it said March 14, 1983. That date stuck in my head because I'd seen it before, on a dusty plaque near the mall entrance, grand opening, March 14, 1983. It was the same year the place first opened, the same year the theater premiered its first film. At first, I thought maybe the camera system had glitched, pulling an old archived feed from the backup server. But the other monitors all showed the right time. Only that one, the theater feed, was decades off. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make out the faces in the crowd. The picture flickered once, twice, then cleared. The theater seats were empty. Completely empty. Every single figure that had been there a moment ago was gone. Before I could even process it, the camera on the main corridor, the one facing the boarded-up theater doors, showed movement. The door, the same one I'd just walked past, opened on its own. Slowly. The hinges moaned under the weight, that awful, dragging metal sound that echoed through the halls. I froze. The motion sensors didn't trigger, and the lights didn't come on. The door just creaked open into darkness like it was waiting for me. I grabbed the radio, my hands slick with sweat. Control, this is Guard 12. Do you copy? Static. I tried again, flipping through every channel. Still nothing, just layers of noise, like someone breathing through a mask. Then, underneath the static, faint voices started to bleed through. Laughter. Applause. Snippets of conversation warped by distance, like a crowd on the other side of a wall. That was enough. I had to see for myself. I told myself it was just a wiring malfunction, maybe a draft loosened the door. Anything rational. Anything that didn't involve what my brain was screaming at me to believe. When I got to the east corridor, the smell hit me first. Burnt popcorn. It was faint but distinct, warm, buttery, with that charred edge like someone had left it in too long. The air itself felt wrong, thick, humid, almost alive. I raised my flashlight and looked through the gap between the boards. The projector light was gone, but the smell, the heat, the sense of presence was still there. Then, from somewhere deep inside the theater, came the soft mechanical whir of a film reel starting to turn. My heart stopped. The sound built slowly, that rhythmic clatter of film running through gears, echoing out through the crack in the door. I took one step back. And then, a voice. It was faint, distorted, but close. You're late. It came from the other side of the boards. A whisper, but it carried, clear as if someone had leaned right up against the door. I staggered back, my flashlight shaking so hard the beam danced across the walls. Then the door handle twitched, just once, like someone inside had brushed their hand against it. That was enough. I bolted. I sprinted back down the corridor, shoes slapping the tile, lungs burning. When I reached the booth, I slammed the door behind me and turned toward the monitors, praying the feed was dead. It wasn't. The screen that had shown the empty theater now displayed a single frozen frame. The image was of a man standing in the center aisle, directly facing the camera. He was wearing a uniform, my uniform. Same company patch. Same flashlight clipped to the belt. And the timestamp at the bottom of the screen read March 14, 1983, 2:03 a.m. The exact time showing on my wristwatch. I yanked the plug from the wall. Every monitor blinked out at once, the booth plunging into silence. I didn't wait for sunrise. When my supervisor came in that morning, I handed him my badge and keycard. He laughed when I told him what I'd seen, said the system sometimes replayed old security footage during resets. Just ghosts in the machine, he joked. But the joke didn't land. Not for me. That night, after I got home, curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't stop thinking about that date, March 14, 1983. I opened my laptop and typed Cinemax Mall Fire 1983 into Google. The top result was an old newspaper clipping, barely digitized. Projection booth blaze claims life of security guard on opening night. My stomach twisted as I scrolled. The article said a short circuit in the projector room caused a fire that spread before sprinklers could activate. The guard on duty died trying to evacuate people trapped inside. There was a photo attached, grainy, black and white. The guard's uniform looked exactly like mine. Same logo. Same flashlight. Same stance. And if you looked closely, really closely, the man in that picture could have been me. I've never worked security again. But sometimes, when I drive past an old mall or see one of those abandoned theaters off the highway, I can't help glancing toward the doors. Because every now and then, if you look through the cracks in the boards just right, you can still see the faint flicker of a projector light, playing to an audience that never left.